Thank you, Ivan. That was very interesting. But of course, this was not a linear, easy process. I mean, we can see that from the very beginning, there were some people, some Franciscans, that were opposed to the following of the Virgin of Guadalupe, even Bernardino de Sahagún. So what about these other religious and political interests that wanted to tone down or to eliminate this devotion? I'm also thinking about, of course, the Cristero War and how a bomb was put in the old basilica. A terrible idea because, of course, a miracle happened and the image of the Virgin was not destroyed by this bomb, so it only proved what they wanted to disprove. But I mean, please, Alicia or Ivan, what about all these other, not as numerous, but interesting agendas against the devotion of the Virgin of Guadalupe?
Yes, if I may, I would like to answer that question, but before I have to take a trip to the 16th century, because many things are explained on what Edmundo Gorman already mentioned, that Guadalupanismo was a symbol of the Counter-Reformation. And it resulted from the extreme praise and devotion to the Mother of God fostered by the Council of Trent, which took place in the 16th century. And the worship of holy images was one of the guiding religious themes promoted by the Council of Trent in its 25th session. So in this sense, we must bear in mind that the apparitions on the 17th century, the interpretation of the apparitions in the 17th century do not constitute the miracle, but the change from being a bouquet of flowers into a sacred image. That's what the miracle is. So as a matter of fact, many have observed how for instance, the sacred original has not suffered damage over the course of time, or as people said in the 17th century, it is precious, colorful, and well preserved. And that is considered, or was considered, a proof of its miraculous origin. But Our Lady of Guadalupe was a Mexican, we already mentioned, a Mexican version of the Apocalyptic Virgin and the Immaculate Conception, and so far and so good. But in the Catholic world, there was always the recourse of seeking solace and spiritual refuge in images of the saints, and especially the Virgin Mary. And also the Catholic world was immersed in conventional external religious practice, in religious processions, annual festivities, permanent confraternities, chaplaincies, pious memories, etc. So things changed in the 18th century, especially at the end of the 18th century, when people began to question the apparition itself, the miracle of the cloth, etc. And many authors were trying to figure out of the scientific colors and the way it was painted, for example, or if it appeared or was painted by someone, etc., etc. So since the 18th century, we have the apparitionists and the anti-apparitionists. No? So, the image can also be seen as many things, people doubting the truth of the miracle and denying its occurrence. So we also have acute critics of existing sources, questioning the original documents and dealing with the apparition, and many of which are now, as Ivan said, unfortunately lost.
Mm-hmm. Yes. That's very interesting, what Alicia is saying, because this argument between the believers in the miracle and the disbelievers is as a matter of fact as old as the same devotion to the Virgin of Guadalupe. One of the reasons this happened is because of the rules the Catholic Church itself placed for admitting new devotions, new images of the Virgin, new saints to the veneration of the faithful, because the Church, because it was fearing the criticism of Protestants, established a set of rules, very strict rules to admit new images to the veneration of the faithful. And those rules stated that it was necessary that local church authorities conducted a research on the origins of any new miraculous image. So it could be the results of that research could be reviewed in Rome, and so the Pope could declare it officially admitted into the veneration of the church. So as soon as those researches began in colonial times to find the documents of this, of the origin of this miracle, they were not found. So instantly the argument began. So is this real or not? Did this image appear? Did the Virgin appear to a humble Indian or not? So in the 17th and especially in the 18th century, a new trend started of people that denied the historical basis of this tradition. For instance, a very famous denier of the tradition, of the legend of the apparition, was a Dominican friar called Servando Teresa de Mier. Father Mier, he dared to go on the feast of the 12th of December to the sanctuary of the Virgin of Guadalupe. He was invited to preach the sermon on the official festivity of the Virgin. And he said in front of all the authorities that the image of the Virgin was not painted on the coat of the Indian Juan Diego, but on the coat of the Apostle Saint Thomas. And it was an image from the first century of the church that had been miraculously kept for centuries hidden until it was shown to Juan Diego and to the Indians. So, of course, that earned him persecution from the church and the civil authorities, and he was expelled from New Spain for saying that. But he was only expressing what many people believe, that it was difficult to admit the original tradition of the apparition of the Virgin of Guadalupe. And the debate continued on the 19th and the 20th century. I mean, it's an ongoing debate, and probably it's not going to take us anywhere, because probably we're not going to find the original documents, but that's not relevant for the fate of the people. That's what is important about this, I think.
Very well said, Ivan. I mean, we can follow Durkheim here in how he studies religion, and just as in Spain, in La Virgen del Pilar is not the column, the pillar that that proves or disproves anything. What is a miracle is the sense of identity, the sense of devotion, the sense of being part of a community that she has inspired among people who believe in Catholicism and beyond. Well, I would like, we have two friends joining us in this conversation, Raquel and Hector, and I would like to end by inviting them to ask anyone a question around this fascinating subject.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Escamilla, Dr. Mayer, Maestro Jaime Juarez, for your very, very exciting chat. I do have a couple of questions. So I was wondering, because in the chat, it was spoken mainly about the Virgin of Guadalupe and not really about God, or not really about Jesus Christ, no? And in the Nican Mupohua, I think it's the same fact. So how the bishops, the priests in the 16th century, when they first came to Mexico, made sure to make it clear for the natives that the important figure of the Christianity is God, is Jesus Christ, and is not the Virgin of Guadalupe or the Virgin Mary, no? Because the Virgin is at the same time the mother of God, but also the child of God, as all the humans are. So I don't know how they did to make really the emphasis so they can understand, okay, Mary is the mean to reach Jesus or reach God, but it's not your God. Your God is God. It's Jesus Christ, no? So that's one of my questions. And well, in the same idea, Dr. Mayer said that the Virgin Mary blends Mary of Guadalupe blends the religion and the patriotism. So can this mean that a non-Catholic person can have devotion to the Virgin of Guadalupe? So maybe a local Mexican does not consider himself Christian, but consider himself Guadalupano, no? That's one idea, no? And also a Mexican Jewish can consider himself Guadalupano, even if he's Jewish and he follows the Judaism, but also worship the Virgin of Guadalupe, no? And my other question is back then when the conquerors, the Spanish, came to Mexico, they used to take whatever they found in the New Spain back to Europe, no? Such is the case of the Penacho of Moctezuma. So I was wondering if at any time the Spanish tried to retrieve the tilma, the clock of Juan Diego, and take it to Spain or even send it to Rome, to the Vatican. I've never heard of such intention, so I don't know if it existed or not, no?
As for the first question, you asked me if the missionaries, how did the missionaries teach the Indians that Jesus was God and that Mary was only his mother, that she was not the divinity? Well, they failed in that attempt because the Indians fashioned themselves their own brand of Christianity. They did not, they became Christians, but not in the manner that the missionaries wanted them to. They created their own divine hierarchies. They created their own cultural meanings for all the new characters that were put in front of them, for Jesus, for God the Father, for the saints, and of course for Virgin Mary. So it was something that was part in any way of the Christianity that the missionaries brought to New Spain, because in Europe the image of Mary had grown in importance in the Middle Ages, because she was the mediator between humanity and God. And so most of the greatest cathedrals built in Europe in the Middle Ages were devoted to Mary. So it was normal that the Virgin was seen as the necessary intermediary between man and God. So the Indians understood that part of the Christianity that was being taught to them. So there was nothing the missionaries could do about it. They were happy that they exchanged their ancient gods for the new figures. As long as they attended Mass, they went to church, they listened to their priests' preachings, they took the Holy Sacraments. For even today, for average Mexican Catholic, the figure of Mary, in this case the Virgin of Guadalupe, tends to be more important in everyday prayer than the image of Jesus Christ himself. That's not to say that Mexican Catholics do not believe in God or they do not worship the cross, but the cultural relevance that Mary has for them is very particular, at least in contrast to other brands of Catholicism around the world.
I absolutely agree with Ivan, and I think that also the image itself gives a lot of messages that were very easy to assimilate in the indigenous population. For example, Mary stands as the mother, stands as a female, the maternity, the protector, the symbol of what feminism is. And I think that...
And they already have their tonantzin.
Yes. And well, that's the dual part of the divinity, no? Also, it's Jesus Christ, and but also this female protector and mother. On the other questions that you asked, I think that yes, there are many people who view themselves as agnostics or non-believers, but they stand as Guadalupanos. Why is this? Because Guadalupanismo is a cultural phenomenon. It's not only a religious practice, the cult of Guadalupe itself, but it's the whole cultural spectrum of what Mexican and Mexico is. And what is absolutely incredible is that the Virgin of Guadalupe is a fundamental part of Mexican tradition. And what is also fundamental is to understand that this cult gives many clues to the understanding of not only of colonial, but also of modern and contemporary history in Mexico. So I think that's the thing that responds to that. I am not a believer, but I'm certainly a Guadalupano.
And as for the other question you made, Hector, about the Spanish taking the Virgin to Spain. Well, as a matter of fact, they did. Not the original image, but many people that came from Spain in those times also became followers and devotees of the Virgin of Guadalupe. Because there's this idea in Mexico that the Spaniards were enemies of the cult of the Virgin of Guadalupe because that could drive Mexicans away from the dominion of Spain. And that is a lie. That's not true. Because many of the viceroys that came from Spain to rule over these lands became passionately in love with the image of Guadalupe. And when they returned to Spain, to the court of the king, they took with themselves copies of the image of Guadalupe. And another reason why the Virgin of Guadalupe traveled to Spain was because the sailors in the boats, in the ships that linked Spain to Mexico in those centuries, the flota, as it was known, those boats, were also devotees of the Virgin of Guadalupe. They came from mainly from Andalusia in the south of Spain. So they arrived to Veracruz and they became acquainted with this image and also became devotees. So when you go today to the south of Spain, to Sevilla, Cordoba, Malaga, Granada, you find copies of the image of Guadalupe in many churches and also devotees of the image of Guadalupe. So they took the image of the Virgin with them, and it's still there as a part of Spanish Catholicism.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And you also see copies of the Virgin, for example, in Notre Dame de Paris,
yes.
in Vienna, in many parts in the United States, obviously.
And in many countries in Latin America, of course.
Of course, yes.
Okay, thank you very much for your answers.
You're welcome.
So,
Do you have a question?
yeah, so I was also interested in the image of the Virgen of Guadalupe more as like an icon nowadays. I feel like people see her, like how you guys have been mentioning, as a source of like identity. How do you guys see that, like that shift has been changed from her being like the saint, like the mother of God, and then her being just kind of like an icon to like unify the Mexican people? Do you think that's more what's been like happening, I guess, or like where's the line drawn for like her being as a religious figure, and then for even like the non-believers, where they, like for people who aren't religious, they see her just as like an icon?
Yeah, it's one of the most popular graffiti images in the walls of Los Angeles and beyond.
And even in like fashion or like the arts, how you were mentioning, she has this like image of like being the Virgin and like pure and like motherly, and she has that's how like many people connect with her. And so I'm just interested in seeing how, if she just has that like motherly, like that's where the people are getting connection, not necessarily the religious aspect of her being like the mother of Jesus.
If I understood your question, Raquel, well, it's for me, in my opinion, there's no line drawn between the religious icon and the secularization of the image of Guadalupe, because she is still a religious icon in Mexico, Latin America, and the world. So many people, if you have had the opportunity to visit the Basilica de Guadalupe on the 12th of December, you'll see that absolutely swarmed with people, and very devout and pious people, really joining the soul with this wonderful icon. So it's still a religious and a very firm religious belief in Mexico. On the other side, it is also, as you said, used in many ways. For example, we can see the Virgin of Guadalupe. I imagine Andy Warhol drawing the Virgin of Guadalupe. I mean, it's present in pop art. So it's really an important for both visions, the religious and the secular.
I agree with Alicia because of its status, because of its huge importance in Mexican history. The image of Guadalupe can be stretched to accept anyone and anything. It can become a symbol of feminist struggle. It can become a symbol of the struggles of the Indian peoples of Mexico to get recognition of their cultural identities. I mean, the image has so many possibilities in that sense. So anyone can enter under its code. I mean, under its protection, because it's grown so much in Mexican culture, in Mexican history, that anyone can enter under her protection. I mean, that's the importance of this symbol. Anyone can recognize himself or herself on that image and fashion it to serve her or his needs for protection, for encouragement. It's the most powerful symbol created in Mexico, in Mexican history. Probably it's so large as a symbol that it can expand to the rest of the world. I mean, there are very few symbols in the world that have achieved such a status.
And then I also had another question. Because we see her image, we see her face, obviously, we don't necessarily have an image for like God. Do you guys think why the Virgen is so like appealable, like why she's so appealing is because we see her image and that we identify that she's a female figure, whereas like God, we necessarily don't have an exact image to kind of imagine what they are.
I could make a little comment there, again, based on how the people of what is now Mexico thought, for example, that famine or plagues or very important social problems and health problems were part of a just chastisement for their faults done by God, whereas the Virgin didn't judge, the Virgin healed. And politically, I'm sure that Alicia and Ivan can make comments, we can see that the Virgin has also something to do with class. It has racial and gender qualities that provide people an understanding of power dynamics, of just social acceptance, citizenship, and is a symbol that also has traveled with migrants and has transcended the geography of Tepeyac, the geography of the city of Mexico, the geography of Mexico itself, and become really a global symbol of these very relevant themes that we discussed beyond religion in cultural studies and in political terms. And this need for a figure that will not judge, but that will protect us, has also been at the core of a very popular image now among drug dealers and drug users and beyond, which is Santa Muerte. And again, discussing this with colleagues in the School of Theology is the same idea of a figure that does not judge, but accepts you no matter your faults. But I'm sure that Alicia and Ivan have more comments.
Well, I agree with you. As Ivan said, there are multiple meanings and multiple uses that are being done here in this time, dealing with the image of Guadalupe. So I think Ivan just explained the many ways in which Guadalupe can be used to serve many goals or objectives, political, racial, ethnic, you name it.
I think there's one side in Raquel's question that deserves our attention. It is the visual aspect of Guadalupe. Guadalupe is an image. Mainly is an image. That's because we can spray it on walls or have it on our t-shirts or anything. That's the visual aspect of this phenomenon. That's one of its most relevant, because the image of Guadalupe as we know it was established since the early 17th century, even before the traditional legend of the apparitions was told and was known by everyone. It was first the image, this woman with this cloak with the stars and the sun rays around. That was the first part of the devotion of Guadalupe that was established. So I think that's one of the explanations of its importance, because God can be, you can imagine God as a cloud or as light or very diffuse, very undefinite things,
Abstract.
in very abstract things. That's right. But Guadalupe is this particular image with these features that are instantly recognizable. And as a matter of fact, in the 17th century, there started a tradition between painters that as long as an image was exactly reproducing as the smallest details of the original, it carried on with its miraculous properties. The vera effigies, as it was called in Latin, an exact copy of a holy image, of a miraculous image, was as miraculous as the original image itself. That's theology of the image. Ordinary people today do not know about image theology, but somehow they have carried with themselves this belief that this image can instantly achieve anything the original has achieved through the century. So that may be an answer to the question you were making, Raquel.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ivan. I mean, there are many wonderful historians at the National University of Mexico who have written about this. Alicia and you are very good representatives of this knowledge. She mentioned Dr. O'Gorman, and we've mentioned, of course, Dr. Leon Portilla. Could you just, to finish, give us a short list of where to read and to find more information about all the different angles in which we can approach the devotion of the Virgin of Guadalupe and Mexican identity, and recommend your books or articles or any of your favorite readings, so that people that listen to us can find them. And perhaps we can do a second edition of this tertulia, of this chat, inviting Q&A from people that are listening to our conversation.
Really, bibliography on Our Lady of Guadalupe is almost infinite. I mean, it's if you just go to internet and you put the Virgin of Guadalupe, Our Lady of Tepeyac, or whatever, you'll find that you won't have a lifetime to be able to study the topic itself. It's so huge. But if you ask me, for example, my favorite books or my favorite authors, besides what we have mentioned here, I think O'Gorman is one of them. Miguel León Portilla's Nican Mopogua really gives light on the Nahua elements. Ivan has splendid works on the 18th century vision of Guadalupe. Jaime Cuadriello is an outstanding researcher on the image itself and all the explanation of the symbols and the imagery and everything. Well, there's Lafay, there's my favorite thing, I think it's William Taylor, for example. It's a great historian that has studied shrines and miraculous images, and he has his latest books on theater of a thousand wonders is an exquisite book. But there are many, many things, and I think people can just begin reading, I don't know, since the 17th century, you can read, you can go to the archive and you can look at Miguel Sanchez, Luis Lasso de la Vega, Francisco de Florencia, and so on. But I think those that I have mentioned are, for me, the most significant.
Well, I would like to add some writers in English, because probably people listening to us would like to write historians in English, like David Brading, of course. Alicia just spoke about William Taylor. Stafford Poole is also a very important historian who has written about the origins of the tradition. And not in English, but also important, I would like to mention Francisco de la Maza. Francisco de la Maza was the pioneer historian using sermons, the sermons of the colonial time, as a source for studying the Virgin of Guadalupe, and also wrote important things regarding the image and colonial art. And well, as Alicia said, there's too many. I mean, some Antonio Rubial, of course, who has made very important contributions to the cultural history of colonial Mexico, has also written about this. Well, for starters, I think that's good.
Thank you, Alicia and Ivan, for a wonderful conversation. I'm sure that people would be very interested and intrigued in all the things that we have learned today. And well, hopefully this will be the first of a series of tertulias, of informal chats that we have with other distinguished experts from the National University of Mexico, UNAM. So all my gratitude.
Thank you so much.
Our gratitude.
Thank you guys.
Thank you for the invitation.